For our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard and Mike here in Houston doing something really special. We're down at the Gulf Coast Power Association. If you don't know GCPA, it started in 1983. It's a power organization that is focused on educating people on the issues and opportunities around power particularly in the Gulf Coast of Texas. For those of you who know power markets, that's probably one of the hottest, most interesting markets anywhere on the planet. We've had a great day here at the conference learning about what's happening from so many angles. We're going to get to talk to two special people here today. Sean Kelly is the CEO of Amperon. Amperon is an analytics company that helps you manage your power costs, which is super, super important in today's industrial world. And we're also going to talk to Mary Anne Brelinsky. She's the president and chief commercial officer of Alpha Generation. It's a huge private power company in multiple states with multiple flavors. These two are super good friends of Veriton. We'll confess on the front end, we invested a little money in Sean's company, so we're particularly attached to Sean. But Mary Anne, we're equally attached to you, but we're just super glad that you two could join us. We're super appreciative of the Gulf Coast Power Association having us. Mike, we got super lucky today.
Yeah, Maynard, it's really interesting. About an hour before I came here, I was jotting down prices, and prices were changing so much from oil standpoint, gas standpoint, market standpoint. And clearly, everybody is looking at the sort of 8 p.m. deadline tonight that President Trump is giving Iran before they start bombing infrastructure, that be electrical infrastructure and bridges of sort. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But, typically, we lead off every week our COBT. We talk about bonds, markets, what's going on in the oil market. So we'll start there. So bonds right now, they're trading 10-year bonds trading around 4.3%. And I'd say, a lot of people are just forgetting about there's economic stats that are coming out within the week. And one of those big stats is CPI that's going to be coming out this Friday. So I don't know if it's going to make a lot of difference, but one of the things we'd like to say on that is that I think people are really trying to understand what is long-term inflation going to look like after we come out of this Iran war. I think most people are expecting we're not going to see interest rate cuts unless we have a recession. We're probably going to be looking at interest rate increases from here. And so inflation is a really big deal for bond markets at this point in time. I'd say as far as WTI was as high as 117 today. I think it ended around $112 a barrel, which is, it's, I guess, fine. But what's interesting is you didn't see is like Brent is trading around 106 today, but dated Brent, some North Sea oil barrels traded as high as $144 to $145 a barrel. That to me seems like more of a true market for seaborne barrels. We saw Omani barrels, Merman barrels a week and a half ago trade as high as $185, $190 a barrel. So the physical markets are just much tighter than the what you're seeing on the screen. So just to keep that into perspective, I say from a broader equity market perspective, we've been saying for the last couple of weeks that the broader equity markets are holding up a lot better than we would have thought, considering the amount of risk that's out there. Obviously, things can change at 8 o'clock tonight if President Trump basically decides he wants some sort of a ceasefire. I think markets towards the end of the day, we're hopeful that would happen. We will see what happens tomorrow morning. Anyway, just from the standpoint of, where, if you look at the equity market year to date, it's pretty much down. But if you look at the best performing sector, it's energy. It's up around 35% as you would expect. But what's interesting is here over the last week or so, energy stocks are actually down while the market's up. And so that's kind of telling you something. The markets kind of believe there's going to be some sort of a deal here. If not, you're going to see a real big tomorrow. I'd say for you guys, from an electricity standpoint, over the last week, you've seen IPPs, electric utility stuff up 1%. But what's really interesting to me is year to date how some of these areas have done. You've seen electric utilities, the second best performing sector on the S&P. It's up around 9%. But if you look lower than that, some of these distributed generation companies, like these frac companies, Liberty, SEI and stuff, they're up 35%. You're seeing some of these other larger generation companies, GE, Vernova, Caterpillar, Generac, they're up 30, 35%. So they've really been big winners here. But if you look at what's happened year to date, some of the hottest stocks last year, that'd be IPPs are down about 15% this year, but SMR companies are down around 30%. So clearly this risk premium is is affecting those stocks. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was, sort of just putting this whole, Iran's electricity generation and the bridges into perspective. I mean, people were saying, well, we might bomb all the bridges and all the electricity grid, and just kind of put that in perspective. There's like 300,000 bridges in Iran. We're not bombing all the bridges, but there's roughly 50 or so bridges that are considered strategic or critical. So, I mean, that potentially could be bombed. But what I think was really interesting is just the generation standpoint. I was like, I don't know how big the electricity generation market is in Iran, but it's roughly 95 gigawatts. And roughly 85% of that is driven by natural gas. So you're talking about, sort of 75, 80 gigawatts is natural gas. What's interesting is when you put that into perspective of what does that mean in U.S. perspective? California is around 90 gigawatts installed generation, like 50%, 40% of that is natural gas. Texas is roughly 170 gigawatts, but I think around 85 or 90 of that is natural gas. So if we were to eliminate all the Iranian grid, you're talking about taking California's generation market out, or the equivalent of Texas's natural gas generation out. That is not going to happen. If that happens, even if we have 10 or 12 gigawatts, that is going to be a humanitarian disaster. So we will see, hopefully, cooler minds will basically, settle here over the next 3 or 4 hours. But that's where we are. So we'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Well, that was a lot, Mike. There's a lot going on. We're all hoping for the best, of course. Mary Anne, maybe I could start with you. We have so enjoyed getting to know you. Your background, you were at EDF, leading the trading business before AlphaGen. AlphaGen was, and these are my words, you'll say it better, but it was a collection of assets bought by a private equity entity that is now creating a company out of it. If you go far enough back in your history, you were an ExxonMobil professional. Talk to us. The thing that you and I are always talking about is the complexity of operating in all these jurisdictions with all these different flavors, with all these different regulations, in different weather environments, with a shifting regulatory back. I'm just always struck by it when you talk about what your job is like. Would you mind starting there? Because it's my favorite topic when you and I get together.
Absolutely, Maynard. Thank you for having me. I have been a power nerd since 2000. So I actually came to my first GCPA conference in the fall of 2000. And I did go back and look in the archives and see what were we talking about at the GCPA conference 26 years ago. And the topics were largely on, can competitive markets work? We had just passed Senate Bill 7 in 1999. We were still arguing about how this deregulation beast was going to happen and how we were going to roll out the rules. And one of the talking points was always, it is so hard, it's complicated. Our utilities are the only ones who should be trusted to the keys to these power stations and the power grids. I did start my career as an engineer with Exxon in Baytown, Texas. Got my MBA and took a job with Dynegy. And my first job in the power space was at Dynegy running a power plant, Cogen Lyondell. And it was fascinating. I didn't know what a megawatt was. So I went to the power plant every day for a couple of weeks. I brought kolaches and donuts. And as a girl from New York, a kolache, like that's a scary thing to bite into for the first time. I had no idea. Anyway, brought kolaches and donuts and listened to the operators and saw the complexity firsthand. And went back to the office, and my first boss at Dynegy was GCPA former director Kim Casey, and she told me, she said, Mary Anne, the first thing we need to do is we're getting you signed up for this GCPA conference. You're going to be able to learn. You're going to network with people who understand, and that is what GCPA has been for me over the last 26 years. Is a place where you can go and hear. What are the current events of the date? What are the challenges that we're facing as an industry, and how are we going to manage the complexity? And to your question, the heart of how do we as an industry manage through? I mean, one is we have to. It takes a tremendous amount of planning. And for us at AlphaGen, and we own and operate 24 power plants across 4 ISOs in 6 states. Weather events, whether that's June heat domes or winter storm ferns, I mean, all of those create different challenges that we face. And for me, the winter is becoming the new summer. With the recent winter storm Fern, that we saw the coldest winter temperatures since 1988. And it was cold in PJM in New York and New England and Canada. And everybody was trying to rely on everybody else. And I will tell you that we have spent the last couple of years at AlphaGen making sure that our power plants are ready to respond when they're needed. And the bulk of our assets are dual fuel. Our CEO, Kurt Morgan, likes to say that, if you starve a power plant, they'll bite back. We're big on investing capital into our power stations. We do the testing. We make sure that they are going to be able to run. We practice. There's a lot of testing that goes on. And ultimately, the relationship between the folks at the power stations themselves, the commercial team, our ops team, really do have to work hand in hand to make sure that we're ready to meet the demands of the power challenges as they, materialize, because every day is different.
Can I ask you a lot of questions as you were going through that? But one is, so you're a private company. Do you think that if you were a public company, I'm just thinking out loud, does that just add a whole nother level of complexity and time? I mean, I'm leading the witness because I assume it would make your job harder.
I'm not sure about that. I think we take this challenge and folks in this room who do this every day. Ultimately we look to the power plants, and yes, we all have stakeholders that we report to. But I would tell you, even as a privately held entity, if we have a power plant that doesn't perform, the world knows it. It is not something that we shy away from. But I do think that when you look at the challenges inherent in managing a power plant, with the volatility that we're seeing in the power markets, the gas markets, the diesel markets, it is, again, not for the faint of heart, but it's something that, if you love power, and like I said, I fell in love with it back in 2000. The challenge of coming in every day and facing a new set of how am I going to optimize these power plants? How am I going to keep the lights on? Keeps us excited to keep meeting that challenge.
So here's my other question, then Sean, I'll bug you. If I had a magic wand and I could change one constraint or one issue or one feature of the power landscape to make your life easier, what would that be? Mary Ann's got this face like, do I have to answer that really?
No, I do. I can remember when I was back at Dynegy and I was explaining to my family, because, to your point earlier, the bulk of, Americans have no idea how electricity works. They flip a switch, the light comes on. Like the amount of people that are working 24/7 behind the scenes to make that a reality. Back in 2000, my mom said, why don't you just build a really big battery? And I said, well, the battery'd have to be like bigger than the Empire State Building. And, that's just the intricacies of power and system frequency and managing supply and demand in real time, every day, every minute, every second. Batteries have come a long way and they are augmenting. I do think that, to answer your question, because I was kind of skirting around it, is the forecast of having better information. We make decisions every day with imperfect information. I have a day ahead power price. I have a day ahead gas price. I think I know where demand is going to come in. I think I know where system outages are. But cloud cover, unexpected unit trips. There are so many variables that go into keeping system frequency at 60 hertz. That I think that is, and it's getting harder. I mean, the grid is We've added intermittent resources. It's been hugely successful here in Texas. But when you add wind and solar and some batteries, which are continuing to come along, and then cloud cover and our real-time desks pay as much attention to the weather forecasts as they do how healthy are the power plants and what's the gas price. It is challenging.
Well, that felt like a perfect setup for you, Sean, that you guys probably rehearsed that. Because Sean, your company does focus on day ahead, week ahead, however far ahead analytics to help people plan their activities. Do you mind talking about just what you're doing at the company? Is our ability to do that getting better? How are you using AI? How do you interact with people like Mary Anne?
Yeah, I mean, first off, it's a pleasure to be up here. When I started the company in 2018, if I knew that this is what 2026 looks like, being up here with these two or these three would be like pretty North Star. And so with that, I guess I'll start with what I was doing in 2000. I was installing Enron Online at Coast Energy Group in Sugar Land, Texas, skipping out of high school 4 hours early. It was allowed. And then literally like making $8 an hour. I'm fine sharing my salary. And
do you mind remind us what Enron Online was? Because it's got some good history.
It is literally how like it was, I guess, pre-ICE, like it was what everyone traded on. And so Coast Energy Group was a propane company out of Cornerstone Propane. And I literally like installed that. Bloomberg terminals were like big and bulky and only a couple really, I guess, high P&L traders got them. And so that's how I started in energy, literally like my senior year in high school. And then I got out of A&M in 2005. On June 1st of 2005, I went and this Keith Emery guy, I think y'all maybe know who that is, took a shot at me. So very appreciative of that. And that's where I got into scheduling. Scheduling was such a great way to learn the market because you had to understand, and Tenasca was managing so much load at that time. And then I got the opportunity to come back home growing up here for Eagle Energy, which is how we know each other, became Lehman Brothers. Spoiler alert, did not work out. And then EDF trading. So it was a fun 5 years doing that. And I mean, all the reasons she said it, it's like we know each other, are exactly why I started Amperon. So I had an 11-year trading career. It was an absolute blast. I walked myself out of the Chicago Board of Trade on March 31st, 2016. And because natural gas was $1.61. So being a cash trader with like making high percent a book, low VAR, and low base salary was not an ideal gig. And having at the time, a broker that I sold was great. And so that helped me understand another part of the business because we had just signed like that month 9 large commercial like skyscrapers in New York. And so wound up holding that during the gas price, made a really nice chunk of change on it. And I called my business partner, was like, I'm going to go do this. And then living in New York was amazing. 2017 was such a vibrant time. Everyone was a co-founder, a disrupting, like it was buzzword central. Everyone worked at Google and Facebook and Amazon and things like that. And so my thesis is like, I like arbitrage. I was trading baseball cards when I was 8. And so like the entire, I guess, just the entire life. And so my thesis around Amperon was, okay, Houston knows energy better than anybody else. This is home. It's really easy. A bunch of y'all had like under 10-mile commutes to get here. And this is home. Tech talent in Houston, not great. New York, unbelievable tech talent. Knowledge of energy, not great. And so that was the thesis behind us, because the things that I saw sitting in, I guess, 4 rows from you was this is freaking hard. And the thesis was it's going to get a lot worse. So this is 2017, Sean, who thankfully landed a bullseye on saying like my thesis was EV, PV, like heat pumps, all these things were going to make demand much, much higher. I did not know data centers were coming to blow this through the roof. I mean, PJM has been flat for like 20 years because of having a grid that essentially found energy efficiencies in the early 2000s, and now is like, oh my gosh, what are we doing in Virginia? And so that was the thesis of finding that. I knew weather was getting crazy. I did not realize that every 3 months we would have a 1 in 100 year weather event. I mean, like our Q1 was slower than usual because, oh, what happened in Q1? Winter Storm Fern lasted like 2 weeks. We had another pop where like all of our Boston employees were shoveling like 30 inches of snow. There was another one in March that showed up. Oh yeah, another war. Commodity prices went through the roof. Like everyone is like, oh my gosh, like we got to hold it down and like do this. And so that's why we started Amperon, and thankful to have 165 customers, a ton of y'all in the room here, just because it's getting hard. Now we can do that at scale and share the exact same thing across so many different customers to give them that 15-day, 46-day, like, and then 5-year forecast for electricity demand, wind, solar, and try to make your lives easier.
So maybe both of you could talk about, because Mary Anne, when you describe the operations of the business, really complicated, lots of variables. Sean, you're trying to predict forward power prices and everything that goes into them. Do you mind each of you talking about how AI, the use of it is going to help? It's helping you produce the data, Sean, that you want, and Mary Anne, is it going to help you manage the business, so to speak, like either real or potential? What do you think about AI, the use case?
I mean, we started as an AI native company. The first time our model retrained was November of 2018. That's also when our first forecast went live. And so we've been using AI from that more of a machine learning standpoint every single solitary hour going back to November of 2018. How we're using it today is to improve our workflows. It makes customer success a ton easier to figure out what happened. It is way easier to scrape all of the chaos that is the ISO data. We're also active in Europe. If you think ISO data is crazy, try TSO data. It is next level. That's just European ISO, and it is just unbelievable. But we're able to go in there with an enterprise license of Claude Code. I have 86 licenses, one for each employee, and they are literally able to go in and just gather so much information. It helps our workflow in terms of like typing in what customer accounts do instead of me having to go look it up myself in HubSpot. I get to just type it in and have a prompt. So it allows us, unfortunately, to hire less and hire really good people, pay them very well, and then give them that tool to kind of supercharge across. However, the relationships that we have in here that are 20 plus years old, there's no AI that can fix that. And that's where you've got such a great moat. And then you also have like a proprietary data standpoint, such a great moat. But it's making our life a ton easier. And thankfully for us, it's just been in our DNA since we started the company.
Mary Anne, what would you throw in?
Yeah, I think back to, going back in time to 2001, we had our pilot program here in ERCOT when we deregulated, and there were 3 zones, north-south Houston, I do believe. For the first 6 months of the market, there was a 15-minute price for each of those 3 zones. So back then, in a given year, there were just over 100,000 prices that you could index products to. So we did it in Excel spreadsheets. You could handle 100,000 things in an Excel spreadsheet and model it. The last time I looked at ERCOT, he was probably 2 years ago, but there were over 26 million prices because we're nodal. And so each power plant gets its price. You got zones, you got the DC ties, you got all these, 26 million individual prices that things can be indexed to. You can't do that in an Excel spreadsheet. And so, when I think about from a IPP or from AlphaGen's perspective on AI, there's certainly several areas where AI and machine learning can help us. One is, operational resilience. How are the power plants performing? When maintenance, the computers can pay attention and glean through that data. FTRs, transmission, looking out, again, we're creating terabytes of data. And what AI is good at is taking all of that data, that noise, and turning it into information that you can then use to make better decisions. And then on the flip side of AI is all of this computing that everybody's trying to figure out how to leverage in their business and make their companies more efficient is requiring a tremendous amount of electricity, which we then get to produce.
Can I ask you, because we've talked in the past about, energy security, and I think that in some ways it was a supply chain type of phraseology, but now to Mike's opening, energy security much more broadly, like the world is getting scary and everybody's got to have more control, more actual security, cyber security. Just in your business, Mary Anne, how is that power policy debate showing up in the things you're doing?
Yeah, it is what keeps me up at night. The cybersecurity, the threats to our critical infrastructure. When I think about the headwinds and the tailwinds of our business, and clearly the tailwinds are we're electrifying our economy. So, we've reshored manufacturing. We're looking at, EVs, electrifying home heating. We've got data center loads. Like, you think about most of our critical infrastructure has been electrified: water, sewer, telecom, banking, grocery. Like, power goes out, you have no credit. Like, how long can you live without electricity? And so, the good thing with the electrification comes more opportunities and more things for us as the GCPA and people who love power to do. The flip side of that is that reliability and resiliency become really, really important. And so, I think as we sit back and look across where are we exposed on our power grids and what should we be paying attention to, I do think that the industry's come quite a long way in the last couple of years around cyber and understanding the threats and making sure that we all have protected the plants and the infrastructure the best we can. But it certainly is what keeps me up at night.
So one more from me, Mary Anne, and then Mike, please jump in here. But I was thinking when your portfolio was built over time, and sometimes in environments where people said, I don't think I need that power plant anymore, and your private equity backer, scooped in and grabbed them. Now everybody knows they need power, right? And so it's a much different investing environment than when you guys were building the company. How do you think about investment opportunities as an entity going forward? Because it feels like, it is a seller's market if anybody wants to sell their power.
I think from my perspective and AlphaGen, it's if you look at our industry and IPPs over the last decade or two, Sean mentioned, PGM and energy efficiency and the impacts it's had there. We were very focused on making our power plants more efficient, reducing the heat rate, reducing the bottlenecks, being able to do it cheaper, better. I will tell you, over the last 2 years, we've been focused on how do we make more. And so, back when there was a refining crunch, did we build more refineries? No, we made refineries bigger. So at AlphaGen, we've been working, and in PJM, they have a reliability resilience initiative. I like to think of it as like the Disney Fast Pass line, to where if you have projects that you can demonstrate to PJM are ready, shovel ready to build, and you can increase the capacity at those existing power plants, you get to go to the front of the interconnection queue line. And so for us across Maryland and New Jersey, we have 500 megawatts of additionality at our existing power plants. We have to invest, we have to do some work and upgrades, but that's 500 more megawatts that we can go send and contract with hyperscalers, for the bring your own generation. So, to answer your question, I think we've been very focused on where can we invest in our portfolio to increase the capacity, at the sites we're already owning and operating.
Yeah, it seems like this was a year ago, but it was 2 weeks ago. Sarah Conference was here in this very building, and what was really interesting to me is that some of the data center people we had, or some of the energy companies, a lot of the utility companies, some of the words they were talking about: demand, insatiable, infinite. You know, as a sort of a Enron guy, I'm like, when I start hearing those, I'm like, oh, I want to go the other way. But anyways, what we don't hear is, and maybe it's a question for you, Sean, is that, and Mary Anne hit on a little bit, is just the efficiency side of it. How do you, like, when you, from a modeling standpoint, start to say, you know what, yeah, it looks like everything's up and to the right, but there's going to be some point where AI efficiency or whatever is going to start to hit. Are we seeing that yet? When do you expect to see it, and how do you price that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's amazing to me. People in this room, we were talking about reliability like the whole time. The broader world has been talking about it for like maybe a year. Texas, we got Uri, but that was really one state specific. What happened with Fern and like what happened with Winter Storm Elliott, can't black people's grid out on Christmas. That's frowned upon category. That was like when the East Coast started paying attention. And then Fern like had at or near records in 34 states, like having that widespread of an event. We just started talking about this. How? Why? And so that's what's amazing to me, is that the narrative like finally got here. I tell our entire team there's two types of days when you're a trader. There's days you make money and there's days you lose money. That's it. Let's make sure that every single day we focus on making our 165 customers day one, that they make money. And so that's where I think there's a lot to look at. We are very weather driven, and so we look less at like the macro view that like a consultancy would, for instance. But it is something that we look at because the models retrain every hour. Demand response is real. Demand response from when our first model went live in 2018 is significantly different than it was previously. How batteries work, there's a bunch of stuff going on behind the meter that we're not really privy to. From a solar standpoint, from a battery standpoint, y'all heard from like Base Power earlier, like cool stuff that they're working on, and a bunch of others in the space as well. Like that's where there's so much stuff changing, and that's where you kind of have to have the machines, the spreadsheets that you were running on and that I was writing on, and having to every morning download that. I wrote the gas number on the board in 2005, and like that type of stuff is gone. You've got to go through so much data that it's impossible for anyone to do it. And so, but the demand is real. It's coming. Is the whole, I think the number I heard quoted yesterday was like 410 like gigawatts. It ain't all coming. A bunch of stuff being double, triple, quadruple. I can keep going, counted. But it's real and it's coming, and we're gonna see that. Like it's been, I think part of the reason, that answer my own question, that we didn't talk about affordability is like we had $1.61 gas. There was nothing to see. Nobody worried about that bill. Now it's freaking painful. And so that's what I think, that's why the conversation's like finally coming to those of us who've been doing the same thing for a really long time.
Would you mind, both of you, commenting on, I think coming into this year, when we would sit around and talk about power, what felt like was happening is power prices are going up. Power reliability was kind of sort of going down. And political pressure was building up. And both parties, and I'm oversimplifying, but both parties seem to want to just jump in and take action, different actions, but everybody's like, we're getting involved. And so you had this backdrop where it's like, somebody's going to jump in and do something and make it worse. Do you feel that do you feel that regulatory risks from states and public utility commissions or market forces, wherever you feel it, does it seem like there is that high risk, or do you think it's getting better because they're understanding things better and they want to make, better changes? I realize this is a real nasty question, but
I mean, I think energy is the only bipartisan issue we actually have out there now. It was being weaponized both sides. Eric Cantor, I know, talked about that this morning, but this is the one thing that we're like, they didn't choose if you're a Republican or a Democrat when your lights went out in Winter Storm Uri. We all got the business. And so that's where like people are finally paying attention to this. I think we're finally agreeing on it. Unfortunately, on the generation side, there's still a little of like renewables versus natural gas and coal, et cetera. And the one thing we can all agree on, unfortunately, is nuclear. That's going to take 10 plus years. But I think this is like finally the issue that across the board, like people are finally like agreeing on that we're like, we have to keep the lights on. And from an AI standpoint, we have to build here or China is going to crush us in this standpoint. And so I think this is finally something we can all get along on.
What do you think?
Yeah, I am. I a long timer, GCPA, Brad Jones, who we lost a couple years ago. He liked to say that the pendulum was always swinging, and for a while it was reliability, and it swung all the way to sustainability, where it was all green all the time. And when I think about it, it's the Venn diagram of sustainability, of reliability, and affordability. And I do think for the first time in a decade or more, that pendulum's kind of in the right spot. Like people are looking at the affordability and making sure that we can, that the average American can pay their electric and their natural gas bill. We do understand what happens when the power goes out is critical. I mean, people die. And sustainability is really important. Who doesn't want clean water, clean air? And let's try to do all of the above. And focus everybody's attention on where those three overlap, and we should be able to agree.
So Sean mentioned, nuclear, and there were a number of questions in previous panels on nuclear. The funny thing is, 10 years wouldn't be bad, right? Like you can't even build a bridge in 10 years. So what do you think about nuclear, Mary Anne? As there's so many different flavors, different approaches. There's micro, there's SMR, there's classic. The government is obviously pushing hard. Any impressions on how real that's going to be?
So I spent 15 years of my career with EDF, Electricité de France, who's the largest nuclear operator on the planet, and got to see firsthand how in Europe, they move their nuke plants around to follow load. We historically haven't done that here in the United States. I do think that people are starting to see the value of nuclear. I mean, there's been the 3 Mile Island deal with Microsoft that's been, announced to bring one of those turbines back. The problem with nuclear is, who pays for it? It's really expensive to build. And in regulated markets like Entergy and Southern, they've been very successful at doing that. In the deregulated markets, it's a little bit harder. And so, to justify how am I going to expand this, I do think coming similar to my, natural gas fired power plants is how can we expand the existing sites and leverage more on that footprint? And, as an industry, we're pretty creative folks and follow the signals from the market. And I do believe in my heart of hearts, we have to solve this challenge. And this industry, I think we're used to the cycles and pivots and how to keep, pushing forward. I do like nuclear. And I
do you think it'll ultimately be big classic nuclear, or how do you think about the flavors and SMRs in particular?
I think, Mike mentioned the valuations of the SMRs year over year. It's hard. Nuclear's challenging, and this business does tend to be an economies of scale, industry. So, like I said, I do think that, in regulated areas and in some places, it really does make a whole lot of sense. And to the extent you have a Microsoft with their balance sheet who can help drive that, it's a beautiful answer.
All right, one more from me, Mike. Jump back in here. Sean, your customers, you mentioned customer base, 165, lots of different kinds of customers, industrial, financial. Without giving away any secrets, what would you tell us is, what are you observing about the activities of those customers, the sensitivities, the growth patterns, just anything you'd tell us that you're learning from helping your customers?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, so we started off with 2 customer bases. We started off with retail energy providers because I did not want to sit in line at a utility with $860,000 pre-seed round and wait it out for it to work. So we ignored for the first 5 years utilities completely. So we started with the retail energy providers because they could give us the read-only digital LSE cert, and we were up and running in like a couple days. And so the retailers, we've obviously seen a lot of consolidation in the market. But after that happens, once the earnout is over, they go start new companies. And so we're starting to see that more and more. Because again, this is interesting. When prices are higher, there's more margin, or theoretically more margin. So I think the retail space is, I think, going to come back in short order after a lot of consolidation over the last few. IPP, the tariffs, we saw them just like completely get punched in the face in Q1 of last year. And a lot of that has been kind of consolidated, rehashed, but now I think it's a really, really strong space because everyone's talking about all of the above. It doesn't matter what it is. They're like, you got a megawatt? Cool. Where does it come from? Just get it here. So IPPs are coming back as well. Utilities, again, they're seeing so much load growth and they're like, goodness gracious, we've got to get out in front of this. And so they're spending money. So, I mean, honestly, like this is a really good time overall. Europe kind of the same thing. They just realized that they're having issues. They just went from an hourly market to a 15-minute market, which was great for us because we didn't have our closest competitor there started in 1997. And so they had to rehash everything and we just got to start there from the beginning. So what I'm seeing is bullish energy just across the board.
So can I just ask you, are your most interesting markets to provide your service? Is it the most volatile markets, or is it the most expensive markets, or what characterizes a really good market for you to provide the service?
Volatility and liquidity. Like you've got, like everyone knows, like there is essentially no real time like New York and New England market. So we have much less traction there. In ERCOT, pretty much everybody has us. Literally 40% of the meters in ERCOT are on Amperon's platform on a meter by meter basis. We've got about, I think it's about 5 million meters here in Texas. And so like, it's because there's a high price cap. It's very binary. You've got to catch those few events per year. If you don't catch them, you might lose your job. And so I think the volatility, but you also have to have the ability, like that liquidity, so that you can actually go in and trade it. You can't get ROI if you can't make a trade. So that's why ERCOT's always been our best market.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the oil prices going up, stuff of that nature. And if things ended today, maybe it's going to take 2 or 3 months for, oil prices, LNG prices to normalize, and fertilizer and chemicals much longer. And we're now starting to hear that there's supply chain issues building up over in Asia. Those markets, supply chains are already tight. Are you hearing that? And if we're sitting here a year from now at this conference, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the supply chains? Are we talking about inflation in those? What are some of the things we're going to be talking about next year at this time?
My crystal ball is really cloudy today.
That's
I
a great quote, Mary Anne. We're going to use that.
I do think that the challenges that we're working through and the interconnection queues and how do we stand up the generation and the load and demand. I do think that we're not going to solve all of that in the next 12 months. I think this is a conversation that's going to continue. I do think that, what I've been seeing in our plants are mainly in PJM, New York and New England, is the interplay between the ISOs and how can PJM, New York, New England, even Canada, because we're importing a lot of power into New York and New England from Canada. How can we leverage those relationships across ISOs to help support one another? I do think that, and then resiliency. So to the extent we did have a threat on the power grid and something did happen, making sure that we can recover quickly. And I think that is it. That would be time well spent as an industry to make sure that we, Uri, we're 2 minutes away from a blackout, and the black start units, a lot of them were broken. That was my nightmare of, if this goes dark, how do we get it turned back on? And I do think that, as we evolve and add more complexity to an already complex power grid, making sure that we have the tools to make sure it's resilient.
Stacey Doré made this comment about the backup power that's at Comanche Peak that Amazon's bringing in, which was, I think she said, a gigawatt of natural gas and diesel. So all this backup power, do you think it's realistic, both of you, to try to, Chris Wright has commented on this, like, let's turn this diesel on sooner. What do you think about those ideas? Are we going to get better at that?
I really do think so. I mean, we have inherently built some, the diesel is a great example of, we've got a lot of diesel tech sets, but they can't turn on unless there's an emergency, and TCEQ and others, give them I think there's other areas, like during Winter Storm Uri, we had over 1,000 megawatts of pool pump load on. It was a winter storm. It was freezing. I know at my house, my husband's like, no, we have freeze guard. We're just going to let it run. And how about we just drain the pump and shut the power off? Like there are way more levers. The diesel is one excellent one. Demand response and smart electronics and EV charging. Like there are a lot of really smart ways that we can help shave that peak and manage when we get in a pinch, that we have the megawatts we need to keep the lights on.
Do you guys think this is the hardest ever time to be in power, or is it the greatest time to be in power, or is it both? Because there's a lot of challenge, but there's a lot of opportunity.
I think it's the greatest time to be in power. And I say that raising capital, especially venture capital in 2018. So traditional VC cares about three things when they're investing in a company. That is TAM, TAM, and TAM. What is your total addressable market? And I was sitting there in a very prominent building in New York explaining to someone, and I finally just got pissed. And I go, do you use electricity? She goes, yes. I go, do you think you're going to use electricity tomorrow? She's like, yes. Do you think you're going to use electricity in 10 years? Yes. Great. You should invest in us. Like, how are you telling me that there's no market for this? Like, it was absolutely mind blowing. And now everyone's paying attention to it. So back to the point you made on Microsoft, same can be applied to Google, to NVIDIA, to Meta. When the money flows, that's when it's the greatest time to be in here. And the money's finally flowing into power. People weren't paying attention to it before, but now everyone is trying to throw money at the problem. And for better or worse, when you throw money at the problem, you normally figure out.
Mary Anne, anything you'd add?
I'm an internal optimist.
That's why we love you.
I know
that, and you understand the details of all this stuff.
I do think this is such a unique time in power, and there are challenges. But we've come so far. There are really smart people who have seen every which way this can go. For a while, power plants, we were kind of demonized a bit if you were burning natural gas or oil. I think that's kind of gone away. People are excited to work on our power plants, and the men and women who go out every day and work, relentlessly to keep the lights on. They are super excited about what's happening. So I do think that as an industry, people are finally understanding what we do and how complicated it is and what it takes to be successful at it. And, I think there's a lot of pride that goes into what we had to do to keep the lights on, no matter what that challenge is.
Super fun factoid as we wrap up. You have a plant, I believe, that Thomas Edison visited, and you're still running it. That's how good you are.
Yeah, energy transition takes a long time, Maynard. When I started at AlphaGen, one of the first things I did is drive around to the 24 power plants and have coffee in the control room with the plant managers. And I got to Kearney, New Jersey, and I was doing the plant tour, and the plant manager, I said, hey, and there's a picture outside the control room, and it's Thomas Edison, and he is scowling at this piece of equipment. And I said, what's the story? There's got to be a story. And they said, well, Thomas Edison was at the commissioning of this plant in 1925. So back in 1925, Kearney, New Jersey, the site that we're currently operating on, was a coal plant. And in 1950, they converted it over to oil. And in 1980, they converted it to natural gas. And in the 2010s, we put 10 LM6000s on that. We're now working on a battery project on that site. But there's been a power generation, turbine of some sort on that plant for over 100 years.
Can I ask one last question?
Always.
Are we going to build a new coal plant in the U.S. in the next few years? What's the over-under?
Maybe. And there are some places in this country where it could make a lot of sense.
Okay. I had to squeeze that in. Well, we really want to thank the Gulf Coast Power Association. This was awesome. Thank you to Sean and Mary Anne for joining us. Mike, thanks for that uplifting market update. Let's all hope for the best. But Thank you so much for joining us. It's a fantastic organization, and we were just thrilled to be here. So thank you so much.